𝕳𝖆𝖕𝖆𝖙 had been a deck officer for over a decade. He'd seen it all: torrential storms, towering waves, and quiet nights where the ocean seemed endless. But nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered that night in the vast and lonely waters of the Pacific. It was a story he barely survived to tell, one he still wished he hadn't lived through. It started like any other night aboard the SS Arlington, a massive cargo ship bound for Japan. The crew was small, just 12 men, all seasoned sailors. The ocean had been unnervingly calm for hours, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. At 2:13 a.m., Mark was making his usual rounds on deck when the ship's radar picked up something unexpected: a distress signal. "Captain, we've got something," Mark called through the radio. The captain's voice crackled back, more irritated than concerned. "There's nothing within 300 miles. You sure it's not a glitch?" But Mark had checked twice. The signal was faint, but it was unmistakable. A ship in distress sending out a repeating SOS code. And it was close. Too close. "Coordinates?" the captain asked. Mark fed them through the system. "About 6 miles west of our position." Pause. "All right, we'll check it out." Within 20 minutes, the SS Arlington was approaching what appeared to be an old, rusted cargo ship. Its name, the Elysium, was barely legible, almost completely corroded by the salt water. The ship seemed dead: no lights, no sounds, no movement. But the SOS signal was still transmitting. "Get the crew," the captain ordered. "Prepare to board." As Mark and a small boarding team approached in a dinghy, the eerie silence of the Elysium sent shivers down his spine. There was something profoundly wrong about the ship. The ocean around them was unnaturally still, the air thick with a damp cold that gnawed at their bones. When they boarded, the first thing they noticed was the state of the ship. Everything was frozen in time. Rusted tools scattered on the deck, ropes half-tied as if the crew had left suddenly. But there was no crew. Not a single soul on board. They split up to search the ship, each man assigned to check different sections. Mark headed towards the bridge, hoping to find the ship's logs. As he stepped into the dimly lit room, his radio crackled to life. "Davies, come in. You seeing this?" It was Johnson, one of the deckhands. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, glancing out at the empty ocean through the bridge windows. "Check the walls, there's writing." Mark froze. He hadn't noticed it before, but there it was, faint, almost like it had been scratched into the walls with bare fingers. "Save us." "What the hell?" Mark whispered, tracing the letters with his flashlight. The message ran all along the walls, all the way to the ceiling. "Don't leave us." "Get back here now," the captain barked through the radio. "Something's off with this ship." As Mark turned to leave, he heard something, a faint whisper carried by the cold wind. He stopped, straining to listen. "Help me." He spun around. No one was there. Mark raced back to the main deck, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was thick, oppressive. The shadows seemed to move on their own. When he rejoined the team, their faces were pale. One of the men, Stevens, looked like he had seen a ghost. "I saw someone," he said shakily. "In the engine room." "You saw no one," the captain snapped. "There's no one here." But Mark could see the fear in Stevens' eyes. The man was convinced he wasn't alone down there. Against his better judgment, Mark and the others descended into the ship's lower levels. The deeper they went, the colder it became, as if the ship itself were frozen from the inside. In the engine room they found nothing unusual at first, just old, rusted machinery. But then Mark spotted it. A door. Half open, covered in rust and seaweed. It wasn't on the blueprints. Mark pushed the door open, revealing a small, cramped room. The smell of decay hit him instantly. Inside they found a series of beds, each one covered with ragged blankets. On the floor were old, tattered uniforms from another era. And in the corner, a figure. It was a man, or at least it had been. His body was shriveled, long dead. But his eyes, they were wide open, his mouth frozen in a scream. In his hand he clutched a journal, the pages yellowed with age. Mark grabbed it and opened to the last entry. "We were cursed the moment we rescued them. They weren't human. We're all going to die. If you're reading this, leave now. Burn the ship. Destroy it before it destroys you." Suddenly the room went dark. Mark felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned, but no one was there. Panic set in. The crew raced back to the deck, but as they climbed, they heard it, footsteps. Echoing, relentless footsteps. But there was no one behind them. The air grew thick with whispers, soft at first, but growing louder. "Don't leave us, don't leave us." Back on the deck, Mark saw the captain trying to radio the SS Arlington. But the static was deafening, and then a voice broke through. "You shouldn't have boarded this ship." The Elysium seemed to groan, as if coming alive. The shadows stretched toward them. The whispers became screams. "Get to the dinghy!" Mark shouted. The men barely made it back to their ship, the Elysium disappearing into the fog as they sped away. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. Back on the SS Arlington, they destroyed the ship's records of the Elysium. No one spoke of what they had seen. But that night Mark had a dream. He was back on the Elysium, standing on its rusted deck. The whispers were louder now, and as he turned he saw them, dozens of figures, their eyes hollow, their hands reaching out for him. "Help us." Mark awoke, drenched in sweat. But the whispers remained, lingering in his ears. He knew they would never leave him. The ocean had claimed him just as it had claimed the Elysium. And he was cursed to carry its burden for the rest of his life. It was supposed to be a routine operation. Captain Eric Lawson had been through dozens of these missions in his 15-year Navy career. His submarine, the USS Denver, was part of a secret military operation to track and study an unusual underwater signal detected in the North Atlantic. The frequency was not from any known submarine or ship. It was a deep, slow pulse, almost rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something alive. Sonar operators couldn't identify it, and higher-ups speculated it might be a rogue Russian sub or some new form of underwater seismic activity. But those who'd been out at sea long enough knew better. When the ocean gave off sounds you couldn't explain, it was best not to investigate. But orders were orders. And now, Captain Lawson and his crew were descending into one of the deepest parts of the ocean, following that strange, unsettling pulse. The USS Denver dove deeper than any of the crew had before. At 15,000 feet, the sea outside the sub's windows was a black void, and only the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sonar ping broke the silence. Lieutenant Carter was monitoring the sonar station when something strange appeared on the screen. "Captain," Carter called out, squinting at the screen. "I'm getting a return, but it's not right." "It's massive, sir. Bigger than anything I've seen, but it's moving slow, like it's drifting." Captain Lawson walked over and studied the sonar readings. A large, unidentified object was lurking nearby, moving slowly as if observing them. It was too big to be a submarine and too slow to be any known sea creature. "Could it be debris from a shipwreck?" Lawson asked. Carter shook his head. "No, sir. It's changing direction." Lawson's gut tightened. "Stay on course but keep tracking it." The tension on the bridge was palpable. The crew was experienced, but this felt different. Unnatural. As the submarine descended further, the object continued to shadow them at a distance, never getting too close but never disappearing from the radar either. Hours passed and the crew grew more uneasy with each ping of the sonar. The object's movements were erratic but deliberate, like it was circling them, watching, waiting. Then without warning the sonar went dead. "Sonar just cut out, Captain," Carter said, his voice trembling slightly. "No returns at all." The silence was deafening. Captain Lawson ordered the sub to stop, drifting silently in the water. They activated the external cameras, but the screen showed nothing but the pitch-black ocean. Everyone held their breath. Then, a faint tapping sound echoed through the hull, like something was gently knocking on the outside of the submarine. It was impossible at this depth. No diver could survive the pressure, no sea creature could produce such a precise sound. "What the hell is that?" Ensign Roberts whispered, his face pale. Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered and a low, vibrating hum reverberated through the vessel. The sound was deep, resonant, like the pulsing signal they had been tracking, but this time it felt closer. Too close. "Captain?" Carter shouted, pointing at the sonar. The screen had come back online, but now it showed dozens of small blips surrounding the submarine, converging on them from all sides. "Are those submersibles?" Lawson asked, his voice steady but tense. "No, sir," Carter replied. "They're something else." The blips on the sonar closed in, but the camera still showed nothing. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was out there was trying to get in. The crew could feel the tension rising, the sense of something malevolent pressing against the walls of the sub. Suddenly, the ship jolted violently as if it had been struck. Alarms blared and the lights flickered again. Captain Lawson grabbed the intercom. "Engine room report," he barked. But no one responded. "Carter, go check on the engine room," Lawson ordered, trying to maintain control. "Roberts, stay with him." The two men nodded and left the bridge. Minutes passed, but there was no word from them. Then over the intercom came a faint, crackling sound. It was Carter's voice. "Captain, you need to see this." Lawson grabbed his flashlight and headed down the narrow corridors toward the engine room. When he arrived, he found Carter and Robert standing motionless, staring at the bulkhead. It was covered in condensation, but there was something else. Handprints. Dozens of them, smeared across the metal surface as though someone, or something, had pressed against the hull from the outside. "There's no way this is possible," Roberts muttered, backing away. Just as Captain Lawson was about to respond, the lights flickered again, and the temperature in the sub plummeted. The cold wasn't just from the deep ocean. It felt unnatural, like the air itself was being drained of life. "Back to the bridge now," Lawson ordered, feeling the hair on the back of his neck rise. As they hurried back to the bridge, the submarine jolted again, this time harder. Alarms wailed and the sub began to tilt. Something was dragging them down. Lawson ran to the controls, trying to stabilize the sub, but the descent continued. The sonar showed the blips multiplying, circling them like sharks. "We're not alone down here," Carter said quietly, his eyes wide with fear. "Whatever's out there, it's pulling us down." Suddenly the intercom crackled again. A voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. It wasn't anyone from their crew. It was low, slow, and rhythmic, like the pulsing sound they'd been chasing. "Leave this place." The voice echoed through the submarine, filling the cabin with an unnatural presence. The crew froze. Then, as quickly as it had started, the voice was gone. Lawson's heart raced. "Full power to the engines. We need to surface." But the engines were unresponsive, and the sub continued to sink. The pressure outside grew intense, and the hull creaked under the strain. The tapping on the walls resumed, louder now, more aggressive. Then, just as the sub was about to hit critical depth, everything stopped. The engines roared back to life, and the sub leveled out, ascending rapidly. The blips on the sonar vanished, and the tapping ceased. The temperature began to rise again, and the eerie silence returned. Hours later, the USS Denver broke the surface. The crew, exhausted and shaken, sat in silence as they processed what had happened. The Navy would ask questions, but Lawson knew they wouldn't believe the truth. Whatever they had encountered in the depths was beyond explanation, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. As the sun rose over the horizon, Captain Lawson stood on the deck, staring out at the endless ocean. He could still hear the faint pulsing in the back of his mind, a rhythmic, slow heartbeat from the deep. He knew they had escaped, but whatever was down there wasn't finished with them. The ocean had secrets, and they had come too close to one that should have remained buried. Lieutenant Sam Grayson had been serving as an officer in the U.S. Navy for over a decade, patrolling the world's oceans on countless missions. But there was something about the North Pacific that made even the most seasoned sailors uneasy. A region known for mysterious disappearances and strange radio interference, it was the kind of place sailors told ghost stories about during long nights at sea. Grayson didn't believe in ghost stories. But after his last mission aboard the USS 𝕊𝖆𝖆𝖙, he had begun to question everything he knew about the ocean. The mission was simple: patrol an uncharted area where a civilian research vessel had gone missing. What they encountered, however, was something far more terrifying than any missing ship. It started with a faint radio signal. The USS 𝕊𝖆𝖆𝖙 had been scanning for any distress beacons or communication signals from the lost research vessel. Days passed with nothing but static until, one night, the radio operator, Petty Officer Logan, picked up something. "Lieutenant, you need to hear this," Logan said, his voice strained with confusion. Grayson walked over, listening to the crackling sound. It was a faint melody, soft and haunting, like the distant singing of a woman. The notes were slow, almost hypnotic, and completely out of place in the dead silence of the ocean. "What is that?" Grayson asked, narrowing his eyes. "I've run it through all the filters, sir," Logan replied. "It's not interference. It's real." Grayson felt a chill run down his spine. Track the source. As they moved closer to the signal, strange things began to happen. The instruments started malfunctioning, compasses spinning wildly, sonar readings showing impossible depths. It was as if the ocean itself was bending reality around them. The eerie song grew louder. Hours passed, and the signal remained constant, drawing them deeper into the uncharted waters. The crew grew restless, some whispering about the old sailors' legends, about sirens who lured ships to their doom. Grayson dismissed the rumors, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, the ship was rocked by a sudden jolt. The crew scrambled to action stations, but there was no enemy, no storm, just the eerie, ever-present melody echoing through the ship. "Sir," Logan shouted from the radio room. "It's stronger now. It's coming from right beneath us." Grayson rushed to the bridge. The sonar showed nothing unusual. No land, no other vessels. Just deep, black ocean. "Send out a probe," he ordered. Minutes later, the probe descended into the water, its camera broadcasting live footage back to the ship. At first, all they saw was darkness. Then something moved. A flicker of light, far below, growing brighter with each passing second. "It looks like a structure," one of the sailors murmured, his eyes wide in disbelief. "But there's nothing down there." As the probe got closer, the light revealed something impossible. An ancient, crumbling temple-like structure sitting on the ocean floor. At the heart of it, a glowing figure moved through the water, its form shifting and ethereal. "It's not possible," Grayson whispered. Suddenly the probe's feed cut to static. At the same moment the ship began to shake violently. Grayson ordered the engines to full power, but the ship remained locked in place, as if an invisible force was holding it still. And then the singing started. Not through the radio this time, but from the ocean itself. The crew fell silent as the haunting melody washed over them, growing louder and more powerful with each passing moment. Some of the men stumbled, their eyes glazing over as if in a trance. Grayson shook one of the men by the shoulders. "Snap out of it." But it was too late. Several crew members had already begun moving toward the deck, their faces blank, their steps slow and deliberate. They were being drawn toward the source of the song. Grayson ran to the deck trying to stop them, but when he got there he froze. Rising from the water was the figure they had seen on the probe's feed. A woman, or something that resembled one, with glowing eyes and flowing hair made of shimmering water. Her voice filled the air, beautiful and deadly. "It's her," Grayson muttered. "The siren." The men on deck were drawn to her, walking toward the edge as if preparing to throw themselves into the sea. Grayson shouted orders, but the siren's voice drowned out his words. One by one, the men began to fall into the water, disappearing into the depths. Grayson knew he had to stop it. Grabbing a rope, he tied himself to the ship's mast, bracing himself against the siren's song. He could feel its pull tugging at his mind, tempting him to give in, to let go. But he fought against it, determined to save his crew. The siren's eyes locked onto him and her song shifted. It was no longer a melody but words, whispers in an ancient language that he couldn't understand but felt deep in his soul. She was calling to him, promising him eternal peace beneath the waves, a life free from pain and fear. Grayson gritted his teeth and pulled out his sidearm, firing a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked through the night, breaking the trance of a few men who had been on the verge of jumping. They staggered back, confused and terrified. But the siren didn't flinch. She hovered just above the water, her glowing eyes fixed on Grayson. Then, without warning, she vanished, sinking back into the black depths. By morning the sea was calm again. The strange signal had disappeared, and the surviving crew members were left to reckon with what had happened. They had lost nearly half the men, all of whom had disappeared into the ocean, never to be seen again. When they returned to port, Grayson filed his report, but it was classified immediately. The Navy chalked up the missing men to a tragic accident, a mechanical failure that caused them to fall overboard. But Grayson knew better. The siren was real. She was still out there, waiting in the depths for the next ship to pass through her waters. And he knew deep down that one day she would call to him again.